I want to tell you a quick story that's true. During the World War, some decades ago, there was an evil ruler by the name of Pol Pot in Cambodia. And he was killing everyone who was educated, everyone who could read, everyone who had any religious background. And he sent in death squads into villages because all of the educated and people who had read had fled to the villages in the jungles of Cambodia. And these death squads were going through and they were killing everybody when they went into these villages. And they went into one village and they began to dig a ditch, and then they lined the whole village up, and one by one, because they were perceived as enemies of Pol Pot, they began to murder and shoot in the head, and they would fall into the ditch. And it kept happening over and over. And finally they get to this woman, and she cries out just before they put the gun to her head, in her own language, these words: "Oh God, God who died by execution, save me." She did not know his name. In Cambodia, they worship hundreds of gods. But somewhere along the line, somehow, it had been passed down to her. She had caught just a little twist of the story, that somewhere out there in the world, there was one God out of all the gods in her mind. There was one God who had died by execution. And when she said, "Oh God who died by execution, save me," suddenly the soldiers stopped. They withdrew the gun, they got in their truck, and they left. And all of the people that were spared looked to that woman who had cried out to the God who died by execution. And they didn't know his name. They didn't know anything about him. They didn't have any Bibles. They didn't know who in the world they were praying to. But from that day forward, that whole village that was left began to change gods. And they all, not knowing who he was, began to pray. And at night when they would pray and when they would burn candles and do their incense, they would pray to the God who died by execution. 15 or 20 years later, I've got it in a book that I've got, a missionary goes into that village. He preaches one simple message, and he uses a cross to illustrate what he's preaching. He preaches the death of Jesus Christ on the cross, not knowing what had happened in the history of that village. And when he told them about Jesus Christ dying on a cross, the whole village bowed their knees and began to cry, because they had found the name of the God who died by execution. His name is Jesus. I want somebody to begin to serve the God who died by execution and pick up your cross. And if I could say one thing to you, I would say this: you'll never regret it. You'll never ever be hurt by the cross. It is a sign of his love for you.